Hey, welcome back to another episode of me, Nick Shangle, talking about detail stuff. Now, if you've seen some of our episodes before, I talk about paint decontamination probably in multiple episodes, but I never really got into what it is. What exactly is paint decontamination? What is clean of a vehicle? I mean, if you've owned a car in the last 10 years, I'm sure you've heard the term clay bar. If you haven't, you're in for a doozy because I'm going to explain it today. These are products that accomplish those goals, from decontamination to clean of the vehicle. And they are two different things. They're not one and the same, but they do coincide with each other, and they have to be done together to get a properly prepped surface and to clean everything off the top of your paint job that gets there from driving it down the street or leaving it parked outside in the weather. Okay, so what do these products really need to remove? It's a good question. Like, you might be like, hey man, I wash my car all the time. There's no way I have contaminants on my paint. I use soap. True, it's definitely true. But guess what? You still have stuff on there. Even if you can't see it with your eye, it's there. And you can usually feel it with your hand. After you wash your car, you've washed it, you've dried it properly. If you run your hand over your car, a lot of times it doesn't feel smooth, or you'll even hear your hand hitting little things on the paint job and wondering what that is. Well, there's quite a few things that are on there, but the number one pain in the ass that gets on your paint job is iron deposits. Where do they come from? They come from brake dust from your wheels. They come from rail dust from trains in the area. And you don't have to be next door to one. It travels a long way in the air. It's super, super fine microscopic little pieces of iron that get airborne. They get on your paint job, and if it's hot outside, it's 10 times worse, and they stick right into the paint job. They're just teeny, tiny, tiny, tiny little sharp pieces of metal. So once they get on there, you can't get them off just by washing your car. You might get a few off, or some of them that didn't completely embed into the paint job, but they don't just come off on their own. And if you leave it on there for years, eventually your clear coat will start to be damaged enough that it'll start pulling back, and it'll start what we call kind of crow's feet. It starts to dry out the paint job, because the paint job can't protect itself from all those elements once they start embedding into it. Okay, so we don't want that to happen. So decontamination and clean. So what's the difference? I have multiple different products here that accomplish kind of the same goal, but they have to work together. This is my clay lube. This one works with clay bar and with my clay towel. This is a paint decontaminator that is very similar to clay, but is actually used prior to cleaning the vehicle. This one is called Spot Rinse, and it's a water spot remover. And disclaimer, these are all products from Shine Supply. I just really love Shine Supply products. We use them in our shop because I know that they work very well. Many companies make products that are very similar and accomplish the same goal. So whatever makes you happy, that's a product that you should use. These are just the ones that I personally use, and so that's what we're going to use for this video. That being said, before you do anything on your car, you would want to have a clean surface, okay? You want your car to be washed prior to doing anything on the vehicle. Now, after you wash your car, you might notice that, like I was talking about a minute ago, there's still a little bit of stuff that you can feel on the surface. If you have a white car, you might even be able to see these little tiny, looks like a microscopic piece of rust inside the paint job. And that's exactly what it is. It's literally iron that's rusting inside your clear coat. Another thing you might see if you live, especially if you live in Southern California right now, you have these little things that look like tiny pieces of pollen all over your car. That is actually bee poop, okay? It's a mixture of honey and pollen, and it's literally poop that comes out of the bee when it flies in the air and it lands on your car, and it's really sticky, and if you have a white car, it's possible that it can stain the finish, okay? So these are gonna help you remove those problems. So after you wash it, you want it perfectly clean, all the dirt off of it. Our first step, which is gonna attack a lot of those little bee poops or pollens, it's gonna also attack any water spotting or etching on the surface, is called Spot Rinse. It's a water spot remover. Now, what if I don't have sprinkler marks on my car, Nick? I don't have water spots. Water spots can also come from having a dirty car that got a little bit of condensation or dew overnight, and usually that'll bead up on the surface of your car and it pulls all that dirt there. And when that water evaporates, you have a ring of contaminants or minerals on the surface of your paint job. So you want to get those off, and this is how you do it. This product, I'll bring up to the camera here, is called Spot Rinse by Shine Supply, okay? you can spray it on the paint job. My professional opinion is do not spray it directly on the surface of your paint, just in case your paint is still a little bit warm. This could possibly leave hazing on the surface, okay? You always want to have a cool surface when you're washing your car, clean, decontaminating, anything you're doing to your car. Make sure your paint surface is cool and you're in the shade or within a building like this one in my wash bay, but do not do any of this in direct sunlight in the heat outside, okay? It'll make your life a lot harder than it really needs to be. So first, I soak a towel. You can even have a wet towel and just spray this on there. This allows me to control exactly where this is gonna go on the car. Maybe I don't want to spray it in the air and have it go all over the vehicle. Maybe all my water spots are just contained to this area, so I would do it this way. I would just very lightly rub it on the surface. Now, once we get it on the surface, we want to let it do its work, okay? When I say let it do its work, it doesn't take very long. This works very fast. And the way that you know that it's kind of done working is when it starts to dry. So you do not want this to dry on the surface, but you want it to almost dry. As soon as you see that parts of this are starting to dry, it's probably been enough time. And me talking right now is actually enough time for this to work properly. I don't have a lot of stuff on the surface, so it's not going to take much to take it off. Since I don't want to pressure wash this on the video and make a bunch of noise, I'm going to use a clay lube to remove this chemical off the surface so it stops working, and this will stop it from possibly etching or hazing or ghosting on the surface of the paint. So we're just going to spray this on here real quick. We're going to lightly wipe all of that off. We don't need to get it perfect. We're not even near done with this surface, so it doesn't really matter how it looks. As long as there's not a bunch of water spots left over, we're good. So if you did this step, and after you wipe it off or you rinse it with a pressure washer or a hose, which would be ideal, if you still see water spots, do this again. You can do this multiple times on the paint job. It is not going to hurt it, okay? You want to strip as much of those minerals or calcium deposits or whatever's on there off of the surface prior to going on to the next step, okay? So we're all done with this, so I'm gonna get rid of this towel. Our next step would be paint decontaminator, okay? It's called Smooth Move from Shine Supply. Many companies make it, they all have a different name. It's essentially the same thing. Most of them are gonna be a clear liquid like this one. And the way it works is this reacts with iron on the surface of your paint job, all right? That's all it really reacts with. If you spray this on, it's not gonna fix all, solve all. It's not made for that, okay? This reacts with iron. If you spray it on the surface, boom, we get that on the surface. If this was a white car with those little rusty dots I was talking about, and I think everyone's probably seen those before if you've ever owned a white car, if this was a white car, probably right about now, this would start turning kind of blood red or purplish and you would know it's working. If you happen to have a dark colored car like I do, you're not going to see it turning purple like you do on a white car. So you have to kind of know when it's working, when it's stopped working, and when to take it off the car. Once again, you don't want it to dry on the surface, okay? You only want it to do its job and work, and then remove it from the surface of the car. So, depending on how many iron deposits you have, you may be able to get away with just rinsing after it turns red or after it works like this, just rinse it off and you might have a nice surface. If you have quite a few contaminants, what I would recommend doing is taking a wet towel, not a dry one, a wet towel, which I'm going to use this to wet mine because it works pretty decent as water, and it stops the car from scratching because it has lots and lots of lubricants in it, okay? So we're going to go over and remove our paint decontaminator that reacts with the iron. We want to get that off the car. And after we go over, it's very similar to using the water spot remover. You can use this multiple times. If you go over the car and it's still a little bit rough, you might want to do a second pass on it. For me, I don't want to because I'm going to show you the next step right now. And the way that we like to do cars when we're decontaminating or cleaning a surface is we like to do all of these steps. So first I'm going to wash the car, then I'm going to use water salt remover to get any minerals off the surface. After that, I'm going to use a paint decontaminator to go after the iron, because not only does it react with the iron and it turns purple, and that's really neat to look at, it actually shrinks that piece of iron because it's basically eating it. So it loosens it from the surface, which means that even if it didn't take all of them off while I was using this liquid and I rinsed the car off, when I go over it with my next step, it's gonna get so much more of that stuff off the surface of my car. So if I run my hand over right now, that's actually, wow, that's a pretty big difference. It's much, much smoother than it was. This car's actually been sitting outside a lot. This would be my next step. And which one of these you use, this one is a clay bar that we've cut in half and folded and used a few times. This one is a clay towel. I'll show you guys a little bit better here. This one's a clay towel. See how it sticks to itself? It's very tacky. You have to use a lubricant when you use either one of these. This particular one is made by Nanoskin. Really like this towel. It's really neat how they made these. It does a very, very good job. If you have a heavily contaminated car, you haven't clayed it in like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and it's just got tons of stuff on the surface, this is probably not going to be your go-to. I would recommend going at it with your clay bar. Now, if you've got a car like this one that's actually ceramic coated, but it's been sitting outside and kind of neglected for the last few months because I haven't really driven it, you don't really need to go over it with like an aggressive clay bar, because anytime you're claying the car, do not be confused. This is an abrasive. This is an abrasive. You're literally pulling tiny pieces of iron into this clay as you pass over the car, and the same thing with this towel, and then you're passing them back over other areas of the car. It does not fix scratches. That is a myth. I've heard many people say that they clayed their car to remove swirl marks, or they clayed their car to remove oxidation, or all these things. Nope, sorry, you didn't. In fact, if you went over your car with one of these types of materials, you absolutely created swirls that may not have been there prior, and you definitely did not remove oxidation from the surface of the paint. It's not what they're made for, it's not what they do, and it's not how it works, okay? These are strictly to remove contaminants that are on the surface, such as iron, maybe little tiny bits of sap that came from the trees. And depending on where you live, there might be other contaminants sticking to the surface of your car that these will release. Okay, so whenever you're using clay bar or clay towel, if your car doesn't need a lot of clean, this will work. This is an amazing maintenance clay, okay? It's much, much milder on the car, and it doesn't leave a lot of scratches. If your car is heavily contaminated, use this one. After you use this one, then maintain it with this every couple months, and it'll make a big difference. So we always, always want to use some type of a clay lube. This one is called Shine Mist by Shine Supply. I don't think there's a detail company out there that doesn't make a clay lube of some sort. This is just my particular brand that I like. All of them are kind of the same. They all have lubricants in them. There's no waxes. There's nothing to clean. This is strictly to lubricate this, so when it passes across the surface of your car, it does the minimal amount of damage and scratches to your vehicle. So this one you want to use as much as possible, all right? I spray the surface first. I spray down my clay towel real well. Then I want to take it and just lightly glide it across the surface. You do not need to put a bunch of pressure on the paint job when you do this. If you do, maybe you just like polishing out scratches and it's making work for you to do that. Short of doing that, there's no reason to press this hard into the paint. It does not make it work any faster by jamming it into the paint job. It's quite the opposite. Same thing if you're using one of these clay bars. Spray it down, spray down the surface. And you can mold these to kind of fit your hand. And then the same thing, we're gonna lightly pass it across the car. It's kind of like when you used to be a kid and used to play with clay. This is literally like clay, and you're passing it across and you're just trying to pick up the contaminants from the surface. Typically, if you go across the car a few times and you look at it, you'll usually see some little dirty pieces. I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the camera, but there's a tiny bit of dirt that came off. And so this is exactly why we go over it, because you couldn't have even seen this with your eyeball looking at this metallic paint job. So after we've done this step and we're satisfied, like we should go over it and wipe it down. And when we're satisfied that that surface is nice and smooth, we're done. And then we can move on to paint correction, polishing. If your car doesn't need any paint correction, then we would move from this step and we could do clear bra, or we could do a coating. If we were doing a coating or clear bra, we would probably do one more step after this, which would be a wax stripper, just to make sure there wasn't any more of the clay lube or any of these chemicals left on the surface prior to trying to adhere those products. Short of that, you could throw a wax on here right now, dry this, wax it, and you've got a nice, shiny, slick car. So these create scratches, they don't fix them. They are 100% necessary on any car that's driven on a public or dirt or any road really in the world. You should definitely look into them. You should definitely use them. If you don't want to do them yourself, you should look up a professional like our shop or any shop near you and have your car decontaminated every so often. You'll know when you go to wash it if it's not beating up water, and if you've got a coated car and you don't see those beads coming up nice and tight, good chance you have contaminants on the surface of your coating. And if you've watched my video about coating, you'll know that it is definitely possible for things to stick to the top of a coating. It's just much harder for it to do it, but it does still stick, okay? So decontamination in clay is part of life if you own a car. I hope that answered a lot of questions, maybe took away any of those misconceptions that people have thought about scratches and clay and how they remove it. If you guys have any questions, please shoot me messages, leave some comments. I'd be happy to answer them. I hope everyone has a good week, and I will see you next week.